They say a kitchen tells the truth of a place. Ours was a glass box bolted to the windward side of Module D12 with a view you could charge for. The breakfast line formed under a louvered awning that snapped and hummed in the Atlantic wind, and when the sun came up, everything — polycarbonate guardrails, stainless prep tables, even the plywood sign I painted for Ravi's galley — caught a glaze of gold. On calm mornings, I could see all the way to a blue line that might have been São Miguel. Someone always claimed they could spot the lighthouse at Ponta de Ferraria if the air was dry and the swell was down. I never could. I fried greens from the hydroponics farm in garlic oil, ladled broth into bowls, and kept a wok going for noodles that weren't on the menu because nothing ever officially was. The file for my stall said mixed vegetarian fare, but we served whatever made it through the head of supply: preserved tofu one week, tinned mackerel the next. If a fishing skiff tied off on the leeward pontoon with a crate of limpets, we made a curry that tasted like tide pools in childhood. If the greenhouse team harvested basil, we threw pesto on everything. It worked because Atlântica worked, or seemed to. We were steel and glass and polymer, 27 hexagonal pontoons locked into a lattice bigger than a football pitch, with breakwater fins and wave attenuators like blunt shark fins. There were solar canopies, a bristling roof of small vertical axis wind turbines, and the beast that I only saw twice, the underside, where ducted water turbines spun in the throats between pontoons, drinking the current and turning it into light. The placard by the dock said Atlântica One, DNVGL Class A1, and somebody taped a cartoon beneath it, a city in a life ring. When the mainland went strange, we told ourselves we were a life ring that would hold. Ops said we were infection-proof. The admin briefings called it hydro-discrete perimeter control, like the ocean itself was a quarantine fence. Any small boat that came near had to hold off at a painted arc of buoys. Our screens showed the world in green and red. Green for cargo barges and supply tugs on the AIS feed. Red for anything with a dubious registry or a position jump. We had security officers in orange coveralls, medical staff in white, and a calm, credible voice over the public address every morning. "Good day, Atlântica," said Director Håkan Erdem at 6 o'clock, one hand on the rail of the catwalk, eyes on the camera. "The wind is freshening to 20 knots from the northwest, swell 1.8 meters, small craft advisory. We will be receiving a scheduled lifeboat transfer at 9 o'clock hours. The transfer point is the lee dock of Module B. Please clear the gangways and observe the guidance of the security team. We remain infection-free." We clapped the first time he said that. We needed to hear it spoken aloud. I didn't clap anymore, but I said nothing. My friend Inez, a security officer with the kind of smile that made everyone behave, showed me the laminated checklist she wore clipped to her vest. I thought the dip of her head on the last line meant she didn't believe in miracles either. The day the big orange lifeboats came, I kept the broth simmering and put out extra hot sauce. People eat before and after fear. It's the part in the middle they forget how. When the first soulless lifeboat nosed around the breakwater fins and came down our lee, the whole platform leaned toward it without meaning to, like a crowd on a balcony watching a parade. The capsule was something I recognized from ferry drills in Lisbon, a 50-person enclosed lifeboat with a hatch like a submarine and a steel skeg for sliding into the sea. It thunked against the fenders and made everybody wince. Inside, through the small windows, faces moved. Women with toddlers, a man in a suit with salt stiff in his hair, a teenager in an oversized jacket clutching blue plastic like it was a talisman. Operations had a dance for this. Marta, from Marine Systems, was already on the bollards with a heaving line, a bosun's chair and tagline ready on the crane, 2 ribs with electric thrusters holding station outside the buoys. Inez and her team had their masks and face shields up, Scanners out. Dr. Sato, the quiet physician from Sendai who ran our clinic like a submarine, stood off to the side with a clipboard and an expression like winter at sea. I was supposed to keep the lane clear. I put enamel mugs of tea on the counter for the security team and pretended I wasn't watching. The hatch dog spun, the door cracked, and the world breathed into our world. The smell wasn't bad, diesel, damp clothes, but everybody flinched anyway because habit had become ritual. A crewman in a yellow hard hat called up, "We've got 27. 2 are weak, 1 with a fever." His Portuguese was Azorian and fast. Marta matched him syllable for syllable, hands signaling something the radios couldn't carry. We had built ourselves like a ship. Bulkheads, watertight doors with dogs you could swing shut and spin tight, scuppers for the water that blew across the decks, grab rails everywhere. We cut a city into compartments. We told ourselves that if the worst got into one, we could lock the door and the rest would keep shining. The lifeboat passengers filed up the gangway to the screening area, one by one into our protocols. The child in the oversized jacket carried something wrapped in a towel like a cat, and Inez spoke to him at eye level until he handed it over. It was a plastic case with a phone inside, the battery icon painted red. She handed it back to him and touched the top of his head. The man in the suit looked at me, not the noodles. I looked away like I hadn't seen him do the math of his life in the window of my stall. 2 hours later, the lifeboat shoved off, empty as a peanut shell, and drifted back toward some ship we couldn't see and didn't ask about. We added 27 to our head count, a column in a spreadsheet that smelled like wet nylon and hope. That was the week the drifters appeared under the pontoons. I didn't see them first. A boy named Luca, 7 by his mother's count and older by the look in his eyes, showed me where on the camera feeds to look. He liked to lean on my counter and ask serious questions about dumplings. "Do you ever see the water from the bottom?" he asked, like it was a secret we were keeping. "Only in dreams," I said. "You can," he said. "Marta says we have cameras under the pontoons. Turbine cameras. But the turbines are off sometimes for maintenance or because there are jellyfish, and then you can see through the moon pools. It's green and dark like there's another sky under us." He wasn't wrong. Maintenance had a Blue Rovee tethered drone they sent down to check for cord wraps and corrosion on the sacrificial anodes. When the turbines were in low flow mode and the water ran quiet, the camera feeds didn't look like anything. Just cloudy green. Pools of baitfish jittering like static. But one afternoon the green was interrupted by a pale oval that didn't move with the water. It touched the underside of the pontoon, as if in greeting. The techs said it was a seal. Then they said maybe a shark's belly. Dr. Sato said we shouldn't speculate in open channels. The next day there were 2 ovals. Maybe an upwelling. Someone wrote on the maintenance log. Maybe a dead turtle. The day after that, 6. The water under the connecting catwalk between D12 and D13 went a lighter green, the way shallow water does. But we were in 100 meters here. There was no sandbar, only current and the humming of the turbines. That night, I had a bad dream about a bowl of tofu floating up to touch my face. I laughed when I woke and didn't tell anyone. Inez told me during her tea break, face shield up while her mask soaked sweat against her jaw. "We have to move the intake screens," she said. "Marta's people think some debris is caught. Dr. Sato would like to postpone the market day because he'd like fewer people on the windward catwalk while they work." "Debris," I said. "Is that the word for it?" "It is for the log," she said. "What is it for you?" "Bad luck," I said, and ladled her more broth. Storms are the house gods of platforms like ours. Every briefing had a slide with curves and arrows. We had truncated cone breakwater modules and dampers built into the pontoon connections that took the snap out of the worst jolts, but we were still a thing in the water. The admin office loved numbers, so ops gave them. Significant wave height, peak period, gusts, surge. They sent out a graphic with the cartoon platform smiling through a storm like it had good teeth. The Portuguese Navy sent a bulletin that used different words, but the same shape. The pressure drops. The wind comes. The bars on the barometer fall like stairs into a cellar. The swell lines, which were text to Marta and her team, turned ugly. She'd run a trawler out of Horta for a decade. She didn't need a chart to tell her what her ankles already knew. There's a low hooking around the Azores high like it's in love, she told me at my counter, eating noodles standing up because the stools were all borrowed and never returned. It's going to come down across us and throw a hand at the south side. The mooring's good, but the new ones on the B module haven't had their proof pull yet. I told them to do it yesterday. They told me the harbor freightmen took the dynamometer to fix a crane at the turbine room, and there was nothing I could do. "Do you pray?" I asked. "I'm not a praying man, unless a pressure cooker is involved." "I check my knots," she said. "It is a kind of prayer." The morning the storm brushed us. The sky wasn't dramatic. It was a matte sheet over everything, a sun behind glass. The wind showed up first, steady and clean. Then a new swell from the south made the pontoons talk to each other underfoot. A low click that moved through the steel like a whisper in a pipe. We lashed down anything we could pick up, zipped the fabric windbreaks until they hummed like drumheads, and braced in a polite way, like relatives sitting up straighter when an elder enters the room. Around noon, the first refugees arrived on their own, not scheduled. They came in a gray inflatable whose manufacturer logo had been scraped off with a knife. 6 of them, then 9 more, then a brown wooden fishing boat with a diesel that sounded like a cough. Security held them at the buoys and spoke on VHF 16. Unidentified rib, this is Atlântica Ops," the radio said, and I turned the volume down in the kitchen and left it down. "Hold off. We are experiencing adverse weather. We will vector a tender when the lee dock is clear. Over." "Atlântica, our fuel is low," said a voice through a lot of wind. "We have a child, please." "We hear you," said Ops. "Stand by." That was when a man I'd never met before walked past my stall with a duffel and never looked back. He had a clipped beard and an air of decisions made. He moved like someone walking to a gate at an airport who knows the airplane will leave on time because he is the one who approves delays. We had a policy about unauthorized movement in the storm. He moved anyway. Inez moved to intercept him. He said something I couldn't hear and showed her a card with a hologram on it. She shook her head once and pointed. He didn't even argue. He just kept walking. He disappeared into a stairwell that led down to the turbine room. Behind the counter, the steam hose hissed and the pot boiled over. I turned off the fire and wiped the burner ring with a rag. When I looked up, Luca was there. "My mother says we should go south," he said. "She says their boats will come back for us." "Their boats," I said, thinking of the rib with the unbranded sides and the fishing boat with the cough. We had 2 crew transfer boats of our own, long catamarans with jet drives for moving people and parts from our tug and barge. We'd launched them twice that morning, but the operator on the second one took spray over the bow and spun back to the dock with his teeth chattering. A jet boat without enough weight forward can do that. It's like a stubborn horse. I had helped him tie up because the dock crew were already in 3 places at once. "They will come back," I told the boy, and kept my voice from being an apology. "But we need to stay inside, see your mother." He nodded solemnly. He'd perfected solemn. A lot of children had this year. By late afternoon, the wind had teeth. The swell had grown into something rounder and slower, and when those shoulders hit the south face of the platform, the whole place rose as one, then fell. The handrails on the catwalks went from friendly to essential. Our VHF crackled with the calm diction of trained people reciting rules against fear. The wet bulged through the seams. The sky shrugged off its gray and turned the color of old electronics. The turbines went to low output because of the debris load. I could feel the change through my shoes. When the first couple of bodies surfaced in the moon pool of D13 as the platform rose, nobody said the word. A deckhand on inspection rounds heard a sound like a knock and shined his light down through the mesh grating. Something pale rolled up under the pontoon and rolled away again. He radioed Marta, who told him to keep moving and not lean over. She called ops and said the words we all avoided. "It's not driftwood, close the lower hatches." In the market ring, people were busy not hearing what they'd just heard. A woman asked me if the basil would survive if the power blipped. A man who had not looked at the ocean in a decade asked me if I had a cigarette. The teenage boy with the plastic talisman had turned it into a radio, I realized, and he was listening to a station I could not. 2 more bodies rose under D12. One of them had hair that moved like seaweed. They humped against the flotation foam that lined the undersurface, then slipped out around the dampers and went out of sight. I stopped seeing them and started seeing all the places in the hull where water could climb. The sea chests that fed the RO desalination intake had big stainless screens on them, but they weren't designed for this. Even good screens treat the world like it is made of small things. We had a brine room with a humming UV sterilizer rated at 40 millijoules per square centimeter, a chlorination dose pump that would have made a public pool proud, and 2 banks of membranes that would reject everything but water and salt. We believed in those numbers, but we did not believe that numbers could stop hands. When the infected rose, they did it with the slow deliberation of anything in water finding an edge. One touched the underside of a grating and pawed at it. The deckhand who saw that first couldn't help himself. He stamped down on the grate like a person killing an ant. He told me later that he thought he would feel something give. He felt steel. "Lower access secure," Marta called over the PA. "All turbine room doors dogged. Do not unlatch any hatch for any reason unless you have an all clear from ops or marine systems. Security to D modules." Her Azorian lilt made even this sound gentle, which helped until it didn't. The water surged up through the moon pools as the low pressure heaved the ocean up and the platform went down. The physical world got into the lines of our graph. A wave slapped a catwalk and sent spray through the market ring like rain blown sideways. Under my counter, the rubber mats went slick. I shut the gas to the burner and switched off the extractor fan before it tried to pump the air we needed out into the weather. The fan coasted down with a whale sound. Inez came past at a jog, one hand on her radio, the other on the handrail, and the look in her eyes was a complete sentence. "Stay." I mostly listened. We did not plan for what a storm does to the dignity of the dead. We planned for swells, loads, currents, the language of forces. We said infection-proof because we could measure all the holes in the system and make them smaller than a person. We said it because language, too, is a breakwater. But the ocean is not a person. It is hands everywhere at once. The first infected who got up onto a catwalk did not climb. They were thrown like luggage. The swell put a shoulder into the south face, and a geyser of green water punched up through an inspection well where a cover had been left dogged but not locked. Water will do that. Pressure opens things you were certain were shut. The deckhand who had stamped the grate ran toward the geyser because that is what he was made of, and then the water went down, and a body came up with it, rolled onto the catwalk, and lay there breathing water out of its lungs like a fish remembering air. It was not a scene for the news. It was just always 2 seconds away from our stories. And then it wasn't. The deckhand froze. He told me he thought he could put his foot on the body's back and push it back through the hole, like resetting a misaligned part. He put his boot on the wet fabric of the body's jacket and pushed toward the opening that breathed like a lung. Then the body's hand found his boot. It was not theatrical. The fingers were just hands, cold and very stubborn. The deckhand leaped backwards, hit the railing with both shins, and thought about Martha in Module A and the way her hair smelled like basil when she came up from the greenhouse. He told me that later. I don't think he told anyone else. Then he reached for the only thing handy, a CO2 fire extinguisher. He pulled the pin, squeezed the lever, and blasted a white cloud into a world made out of water. The infected person flinched. It had a reflex left for cold. It was enough. The deckhand used the top of the extinguisher like a baton against the grating latch, slammed it closed, kicked the dogs in place, and spun them tight. Water hammered the underside and made the mesh ping, and he ran. At my stall, we heard the turbine room alarm in its own language, an urgent, metallic clanging that says, not heat, not smoke, but intrusion. The man with the duffel who had walked downstairs reappeared with a different duffel. Dirty and heavy, he walked like a punishing memory. He was bleeding from one knuckle like he had argued with a bolt. Inez intercepted him again, voice flat now. "Sir," she said. She did not add anything after that because she knew a little word said like a wall is better than a speech. "The emergency boats," he said. "Where are the emergency boats?" "In use," she said, and they were. We had launched both CTVs to shepherd the refugees off the buoys. During the second launch, a wave came up under the stern, made the boat's jet intake cavitate, and they had to throttle back hard or the impeller would spin up and holler and do nothing. The second crew took one look at the ribs pitching like bucking dolphins and put their bows toward the pontoons. They made it in, but just. "We have to evacuate," the man said, the words hitting the air like objects. "We have to secure," Inez said. "I can fly a helicopter," he said. "We do not have one," she said gently. He stared at her, realizing how much of his life had been, quietly, modestly, built around the assumption that somewhere there was a helicopter with fuel and rotors and people who would say yes when he called. "Then a flare," he said. "EPIRB, radio beacon. Something." She pointed at the sky like a teacher asking a child to identify what a cloud was. "They know what this is. You are not the only light on the water." Somebody screamed. It was the wrong sound for everything else, high and ragged like burning paper. It came from the greenhouse corridor where the glass roof met the wind. A woman running toward Module E slipped and slid, arms windmilling. A body that might have been a man rolled up against the foot of the greenhouse door with the intimacy of a wave. It traded places with water for a second, then the water left it and the door opened because someone inside had heard the scream, and because that is what we do. I climbed the counter, dropped onto the deck on the other side and ran. Inez shouted my name, but I was already sliding the last 2 meters, catching the handrail, and turning the last corner into wind that slapped the breath out of me. The greenhouse door was open 2 hand widths. Inside, a young engineer named Paloma was holding it like a gate against a goat. The thing on the threshold wasn't lunging so much as letting the next wave help it. Another human had put their shoulder against Paloma's shoulder and their face against their sleeve. The door was not built to keep out anything that wanted in as much as that water did. I grabbed a boat hook from the rack, the long fiberglass kind with a rubber boot on the end. I wedged it into the corner where the door met the frame and levered with all the discourtesy I had. Paloma let out a sound that might have been a curse or a prayer in Spanish, and the door came in 2 centimeters. The body moved with it, and we all learned more about friction than we had intended to that day. It had a jacket on with a stitched name on the breast. Hugo, or Hugie, with the O torn off. The jacket had soaked up a barrel of water and weighed like it. The hands were ordinary hands. They scrabbled at the smooth sill like they were sick of being cold. "You can't leave him out there," yelled the human behind Paloma from inside. "We can't just—" "Hold," Paloma grunted, "because there are words you can say in any language with your ribs. Hold." I switched my grip on the boat hook, pushed the rubber boot into the crook of the body's elbow, and leaned the other way. Force vectors would have been nice here. We had none. The ocean had all of them. The next rise lifted the body into the opening, and for a second it was worse because I saw a face and a mouth making slow shapes that weren't words. The hands grabbed the doorframe and made the physics unfair. Then the wave fell away again, sucking at the thing like a vacuum, and the hands lost their argument with wind. I jammed the hook into the crook of the elbow and shoved with everything I had left of youth, and the body let go of the doorframe, slid backward 1/2 meter, and stopped because the next piece of steel caught it. "Now," Paloma said, and slammed the door. The human inside let out a sound like a news story ending without a resolution, and we spun the dogs. The thing outside stood up. Not quickly, not even efficiently, like the way you stand in a kayak without falling. It got itself on all fours while the deck was dry, and when the next wave ran an inch of water across the plating, it used that to surprise gravity. It made it to its knees and then to its feet and looked at me. It did not have drama in its eyes. It just wanted to be somewhere warmer, and I was somewhere warmer. If a wave had not knocked it 3 meters aft, perhaps it would have walked. It took 3 slow steps. I took 5 quick ones. I left the boat hook where it fell and got back to my stall without a coherent thought that wasn't a list of names and ways to shut doors. "Lower deck is holding," Marta said on the PA. "We've cut power to the south turbine bank. Repeat, power is cut to the south bank." The lights blinked and came back. A city reminding itself that it can breathe with one lung. All non-essential movements cease. I pulled the shutter down in front of the stall, which felt like hiding behind paper in a house made of doors. Inside, the burners were cold. The stockpot sloshed a question at me, and the wind rattled the aluminum frame. I realized I was shaking hard enough to sound like cookware. I turned the radio back up with the absurd hope that a voice saying something in the right cadence would rewind the last 5 minutes like a tape. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is fishing vessel Santa Lucia, 2 miles east of your position. We are dragging anchor. Repeat, dragging anchor. Request assistance." "Santa Lucia, this is Atlântica Ops," said the radio in a voice that belonged in a museum of calm. "We have heavy seas and cannot launch a tender at this time. Advise you pay out more, road, and head into the swell. If possible, use engine ahead to ease the strain." Engine is... The rest was wind. The VHF went to noise, and then to a different station entirely. Some coastal weather feed speaking of barometric lows like suburbs on a map. If you've ever waited inside a wall while something knocks on it, you know that time has joints like a ladder and you count them. We counted ours with alarms. The turbine room intrusion alarm on D12 went off again, then stopped. The same alarm on D13 did not stop until someone pulled the sounder and beat it silent with a wrench. When the PA came back, it had Håkan's voice on it, wind invaded and thinner than usual. "Friends," he said, and I wanted to forgive him for everything because he used that word on purpose. "We have unexpected intrusions through the lower access points. Security is en route to all modules. Please secure your compartments and avoid the south catwalks." We will begin staged movement toward the north shelter, in the brine room and battery hall, in the next 30 minutes, conditions permitting. Do not attempt to make your way to the docks. I repeat, do not attempt the docks. Someone asked a question that wasn't a question. He could have said any words after that, and we would have answered with the same silence. I opened the shutter to the counter a hand's width and saw a world that looked like a photograph taken on an old phone. Pixelated with rain, gray, tilted. Inez appeared in that slit, mask splotched with spray, goggles beaded. "Close up," she said. "Then come with me." "Where?" "The north shelter. We're pulling everyone inside the battery hall. It's 3 doors thick and there's no lower hatch." "The boy," I said. "Luca." "Paloma has him," she said. "She got the greenhouse crew locked down, and she's leading a group on the service corridor. We will sweep them as we go." "And you?" "And I am here to get you," she said, tapping the counter like she was checking a melon for ripeness. "You do not get to be brave today." "Open question," I said, and my hands went to the gas valves as if finishing an incomplete task from a former life would open a portal back to it. We slid along the handrail, 2 ghosts in a rain machine. The water came in sheets across the deck and carried everything that wasn't bolted, including my chalkboard menu, which pivoted on its string and smacked the deck with a noise I will hear at the end of my life. We passed 3 people in a knot, one trying not to cry, one trying not to look at the water, one trying not to run. We passed the door where a minute ago a stubborn thing had tested my elbows. It was latched and dogged and ringed with footprints. The infected thing that had stood up on the deck was gone, maybe washed away, maybe knocking on some other door. I didn't ask. At the corner below the admin office, we heard a sound that wasn't wind or water or alarms. It was a metal squeal that meant a hinge was doing work it had not been asked to do. The door to the south stairwell, the one down to the turbine room, where Marta had ordered everything dogged, was open 5 centimeters. Not because someone had opened it, but because the door frame was failing where the weld met the sill. The hinge bolts were fine. The steel beside them had given up in a shape like a crescent moon. That can happen when a platform flexes. Builders design for it. They don't design for a world where someone keeps banging on that door with a patient palm. We were looking at the gap when something looked back. It would be poetic to say it was an eye. It was just an obligation to keep moving that had found a hole, and now we were its destination. Inez stepped in front of me and didn't even look proud when she did it. She just made the calculation a person in a uniform makes, the one that says this is why I clipped a laminated checklist to my shirt. "I'm going to shut it," she said, and in that second I imagined jokes I could make about the obvious. "I'll help," I said, because the only answer to intention is a copy of the same. We grabbed the wheel and pulled. Doors like that can take a finger and mail it to a different city if you're not careful, so we were careful in a way that made no difference. The something on the other side wasn't fighting. It was just present and heavy and persistent. The gap narrowed to 3 centimeters. The edge of a hand came in like a card slid under a door. It was not a movie hand. It was swollen and white and stubborn. It had a ring on the 3rd finger, A. The stone was a cheap blue. I stared at that stone like it was an instruction. Inez looked me in the eye over her mask and nodded once. She said a word in Portuguese that I didn't catch, then another one I did. Agora. We pulled. The door answered with the truth of steel. The hand folded like paper between 2 things that did not care about its once warm story. The ring pinched, shot off like a marble, and pinged against the deck. The door shut. The dog spun. The sound on the other side became the sound people make when they are trying to leave a place, and the place declines to open a space for them. We stood there, tilted under wind. our feet shoulder-width apart because that's what years at sea teach you. Inez put a hand on my shoulder and squeezed exactly 3 times like a code. "Move," she said, because the world is full of nouns and verbs, and one of them was the difference between here and later. We made the north shelter with a caravan of 25. Paloma's greenhouse crew, 2 admin clerks, 4 security officers, Luca and his mother, the teenage talisman boy and his mother, the man with the duffel, who had suddenly started asking permission before moving through doors. The battery hall had 3 layers of doors because lithium-ion batteries deserve that courtesy. It smelled like cables and dry air, and a faint hint of outgassing that Marta would never have admitted, and Dr. Sato would have. The light came from LED strips that made everyone look like they'd never seen the sun. Somebody's wet hair dripped on a junction box, and an electrician materialized like a guardian spirit to put a towel over it without making a face. We had a stack of survival suits in orange bags and a case of water jugs stamped with a company logo we didn't support but could not use. There were also, because Marta was thorough, 3 heavy bars to brace the inner door if cohesion went wrong. We braced it anyway. Somebody joked about zombies and caught themselves saying it out loud. The word hung in the hall like steam. Dr. Sato didn't flinch. "Not a helpful label," he said. And now he had my heart as well as my mind. "They are dangerous, and that is sufficient." I handed out mugs of broth that had cooled but still carried garlic and pepper and the story of a warm day. People took them in their hands like diplomats receiving documents. Luca sat at my feet because his mother had discovered that children sit when their people do. He reached for my hand twice and stopped both times before he got there, then went ahead the 3rd time, like a scientist who has assembled sufficient evidence to publish. I let him hold it. Inez took the radio and spoke to Ops and got information and spoke it into the hallway in units sized for holding. "South modules are compromised at the lower deck," she said. "We have door failures at 2 points. Marine systems are controlling flow in the turbine channels. We have cut power to the south bank, repeat power cut. The north modules are holding. The docks are not safe. Do not attempt the docks." The man with the duffel had a look about him like the ocean had rewritten parts of his book without asking. He sat down by the rack of suits and took out what I thought at first was a pistol, and at second glance was a flare gun, a red plastic single shot that could put a ball of fire against a sky. He looked at it with the tenderness of a genuine Plan B. I did not ask where he had found it. I did not ask what he planned to do with it. There are uses for fire indoors. There are fewer we approve of. "Put it in the locker," Inez said mildly. He did without arguing, and if I'd been asked to grade the day, I'd have given that a bright mark. The shelter is the kind of place where time does arithmetic in slow motion. I don't know how long we were there before the door shook once, like a dog trying the rain off its back, then settled. We could hear water beating steel and steel, answering that it would like to be somewhere else. Outside, the storm was deciding whether to move on or stay for dinner. The barometer would have told us if we'd had a barometer, but we had the door and the wind in the vents and a world of sounds that taught us to count. When the PA came back on, it was Håkan again, and the voice had a new thing in it, something like a man willing the words to be stronger than the wind. "Atlântica, this is Ops. We have gotten a message from Maritime Rescue Coordination Center Lisbon via Azores. They have our E/B signal. The Portuguese Navy patrol vessel NRP Viana do Castelo is underway from Horta. ETA unknown due to weather. An EH-101 from Lajes is on standby to deploy when winds allow." He paused, because even the practiced voice has to breathe, and the breathing makes you have a body again. "We will hold until then. You could have bottled the sound that made in the room and sold it as a drug. Hope has a tone. It is not a trumpet blast. It is smaller and inside the chest. "Who triggered the EPIRB?" someone asked. There was a rustle, a glance, a moment where it might have been luck. Then the man with the duffel said, not humble but plain, "I did. I took the one from the south locker." He did not ask forgiveness for leaving the place that EPIRB belonged to without the device it would have needed. We all did the math instantly. We remembered the door with the crescent moon scar. "Good," said Inez, and did not add the rest of the paragraph about policy and triage and how you live with the world as it is rather than as you intended it to be. Time passed. The door didn't open. A child slept with their head against a battery cabinet, and an electrician slid a folded coat under their ear. Dr. Sato scribbled a list on a clipboard with the neatest writing I have ever seen. Paloma told Luca a story under her breath in Spanish about a town where the wind was a hero. I counted my hands and found both. I wanted to call my mother in Goa and tell her about the basil and how the wind here has different salt than it does there, more iron. I wanted to call too many people. There are silences that are full and silences that are empty. The one that followed the worst of the wind was full because something large had left the room, and we could hear ourselves again. We unbraced the bar and opened the inner door a hand's width. The hallway outside smelled like rubber and weather, like a room after an argument, even if no one had raised their voice. We made the walk back to Module D12 like a field trip. Single file, 2 security officers at the front, 1 at the back, people holding onto the handrails in a way that said they were going to get good at this. The sky had gone from gray to a strange pale, the kind that means the storm has slunk off to bother another radius and left us in the sweep of its tail. The swell still shouldered the platform, but it had lost the energy of an insult and returned to the workmanlike thumping of a world doing weather. The drifters had lodged where they lodged, 2 in the mesh of the south catwalk. 1 rolled back and forth in the wake of a pontoon in such a way that if you had no mind for faces, you'd think it a soft bundle. Security worked around them with care. They did not use solemn words. They did not touch the faces. They used lines and boat hooks and covered the work when someone had to cross. My stall was still there. The chalkboard menu lay face down, and the string had sawed a little groove in the edge of the counter where it had pulled and banged. The shutter had a dent like a thumb. Inside, the pot of broth had become a metaphor and needed to be discarded. I poured it into a bucket and then into the gray water drum, telling myself with each move that the world was smaller than it had been, and that this was how you wrestle it down to human size again. Inez leaned on my doorway with that small smile that had gotten many people through longer nights than this one. "You made it," she said. "We made it," I said, because the first person is a kind of pride and the plural is a kind of promise. "What did you learn?" she asked, and it was not a school question. It was a kitchen one. "That the word infection-proof was a confidence," I said, "not a fact. That we are still at sea even when we draw a map we like." She nodded. "That is the business we are in." "Is it?" I asked. "I thought I was in the business of garlic." "Same business," she said. "Yours just smells better." The next day brought a clear line on the horizon, blue on blue, and a sound in the distance like a kitchen drawer full of metal spoons. I came out to the catwalk and looked south, hand shading my eyes. The patrol vessel came into view, the gray shape of the Viana do Castelo, clean and a little improbable like a toy in a bathtub. She held off at a distance that said she was not going to slam into her pontoons and make the engineers write a story. She put a rib into the water with 6 people in orange helmets who made lines go where lines wanted to go, and pretended the water was not 2 seconds from telling them no. An hour later, an EH-101 Merlin helicopter came up from the west. big and green and loud, and looking like it had been designed by a child with a generous sense of proportion. It held station with dignity over our north face, and the winch operator in the hull made a kind of magic I have always respected, the art of putting humans in air like they were supposed to be there. We didn't evacuate. Not the way the man with the duffel had imagined. The helicopter took the worst of the injuries, and the two patients Dr. Sato had been watching with a seriousness that made the air around him still. The patrol boat took 3. The rest of us stayed because Atlantica wasn't a lifeboat so much as a key, a place that tied other things together. When the storm returned in the small hours, as weather in the islands sometimes does, we were still there to calculate courage. The infected in the water did not keep coming in the same way. Some drifted away, some lodged. The Portuguese Navy sent a team with suits and nets to do a work I could not watch for long. They did it like any other cleanup, with gloved hands and judgment. They did not say words that people put under news headlines. I made them soup. One of them wore his mask pulled down to his chest, and his face was 30 and exhausted. He said obrigado twice like a person who'd been saving the word for something he could keep. That evening, we held a meeting in the market ring under the big polycarbonate. A circle of 20 people and then 50 and then 100 because that is how circles work. Håkan spoke with his hand on the rail so the wind could not take him away. Marta said her part in fewer words. Ines did not speak at all, which was a kind of leadership. Dr. Sato spoke once to say that language matters, that we should keep saying dangerous and infection and not give our fear a name from a film. The man with the duffel stood at the edge and folded and unfolded his hands. He caught my eye once and nodded. I nodded back. We were not friends, and we were not enemies, and we were now the kind of people who had pulled a door shut together. That is a relationship. When it was my turn to say something, because someone said it was, I said this. I have a stall on D12 that serves greens and broth that sometimes tastes like the ocean, and sometimes like pepper, and the only thing I am an expert in is whether an onion is ready to listen to the pan. But I know that what we did yesterday was not what we expected we would have to do, and we did it anyway. There will be more days like that, because we live on the water and the water does not sign contracts, and because the world beyond us is writing a story we didn't approve. So we will make smaller promises to each other. I will open the stall. If you have basil, you will bring it to me. If you don't, I will find a way to make breakfast worth waiting for. We will stop saying proof. We will start saying practice. We will practice locks and lines and the way a shoulder against a door is a way to say, we are here with you. We will still give the last bowl of soup to a child, because that is how we recruit for tomorrow. And when a patrol boat comes into view, or a helicopter hovers, we will say, thank you, and then we will go back to work. It wasn't a speech so much as a recipe, but people let it be both. Someone clapped because someone always does. Someone else laughed the way a person does when they locate a place to put a portion of fear down and leave it there for an hour. Luca came by the next morning and stood at the counter with serious eyes and a damp sleeve. "Did you see the bottom of the water?" he asked, as if this was a thing you could check on a to-do list. "I saw the part that comes up to the top," I said. "It was not the bottom." "Can we go to the bottom?" he asked, not as a dare but as a curiosity. "Someday," I said. "With a camera. With Marta yelling at us on the radio and Dr. Sato pretending he doesn't approve and your mother making a face like rain. We will see fish and cables and the part where the ocean keeps everything in her pocket. We will wave to the turbines and they will ignore us because they are at work. And you will tell me something inside your head and I will pretend I already knew it." He accepted that. He took his bowl of noodles and went to sit on the floor by the railing the way children do when adults pretend they have furniture. On the third day, after the storm, a fisherman from Santa Maria came by with squid he had kept on ice like a moral. We made them into something with chili and garlic and mint from a planter that had been blown over and righted and looked like a person who's decided to keep at it. The wind had the decency to leave us mostly alone. The solar canopy made a pretty pattern on the deck. We went to the south catwalk with ropes and a net and did the work that needed doing without names. We closed the door with the crescent moon scar and welded a doubler plate over the weakness and ground it smooth. The ring we had kicked into the hallway glinted once in the afternoon sun and then stopped doing that forever because the afternoon decided to be cloudy. At night, when the lights went down to the usual, I stood at the rail and watched the water and tried to give it the respect old mariners gave it without slipping into superstition. Out in the dark, something knocked once against the pontoon like a minor proposition. I did not answer it. I went inside to sleep, already writing the next day's shopping list in my head, which is another kind of prayer. In the weeks that followed, the lifeboats returned sometimes and did not others. The Navy ship was not always a horizon away because ships and people have other work. The helicopter was a noise twice more, once for a child with a fever, and once for a woman in labor who made a sound you do not forget and got a story you can tell for years with joy because the landing was good. The infected in the water did not become our weather. They were part of it, the way any hazard learns our names, and then becomes statistics we quietly honor with procedures, like the guy lines we added near the south catwalk, like the new bolt size in the hinge, like the way Inez now touched each door when she walked by as if checking a friend's pulse. We stopped saying infection-proof. Hakan stood on the rail and said, with the humility of a person rewriting a promise in public, "We are infection-aware. We are as safe as our practice, which means we are safer together than alone." People complained because people are very good at that, and then they put their hands on the rail and stopped pretending the ocean is a storybook. When the weather went strange again, and the swell arrived from a direction it had no business coming from, we moved like a single person in a complicated kitchen. Marta had her lines. Marine systems had their screens. Security had their checks. Dr. Sato had his neat list. The greenhouse crew had their duct tape and their hope. I had my ladle and the way I speak to onions. Luca had his observational report, which improved in diction and spelling and content until it was a document any engineer would be proud to sign. The infected rose again once, but we were ready with grating locked and doors dogged and a way to look at a hand in a doorway and see physics rather than fate. We shut the door kindly. We marked the scar and wrote it down in a log that smelled like mildew and courage. I learned the names of the turbine parts because it helped to give the work a vocabulary. Kaplan blades, diffuser duct, variable pitch, gearbox cover, shaft seal. I learned the names of the human parts too, which are often the same across languages. The small of the back that aches when you stand too long. The eye that winks when a child steals a dumpling with both hands. The hand that knocks a rhythm on the counter, asking for more. Once, in a lull with the kind of sun that reveals things, I walked down with Marta to see the lower deck where we never had time to linger. The turbine room had its own weather, cool, oily, precise. We stood on a grating that would not betray us, and she put a boot on a beam with the confidence of a person who has built a life out of beams. Below, the ducted throat of the turbine took the ocean in and made it into a hum that made my ribs vibrate. The ocean did not mind. It had plenty to spare. "You called the rescue," I said, not a question. "You pulled the door," she said. "We all did something stupid and necessary. It is a community." "We built this place like a ship," I said, touching the bulkhead where the paint bubbled just so. "It is a ship," she said, "just a quiet one." We watched the water go its way under us, indifferent, inexhaustible. The drifters had stopped appearing in the moon pools. The camera feed showed baitfish again, and a school of mackerel like a paragraph of commas. Somewhere out there, the mainland continued to write a story about fear and normalization, quarantines and news cycles, words like policy and surge. Here, we wrote smaller chapters with long sentences about dumplings and doors and the uses of a boat hook. One night, I woke to wind that sounded like someone reminding us who owned what, and I went to the kitchen to check a list that did not need checking. In the half-light of LEDs that forget to sleep, I found the man with the duffel at the rail, staring at the dark like he'd lost a coin in it and was trying to persuade the water to hand it back. "Do you miss it?" I asked, because questions are cheap when there's no one else listening. "What?" he said. "The world where a helicopter was always a phone call away." He laughed once, without sadness. I miss believing I was the kind of person who could call one, not the machine. "We all miss being better in our own heads," I said. "We don't miss the part where the weather could kill you and you didn't know your neighbor." He nodded. "I didn't know my neighbor," he said. "Now you do," I said. He held his hand up like a votive and looked at it. The knuckle he had scraped in the turbine room had healed without drama. He flexed his fingers like they were new. "I keep thinking about the hand at the door," he said. "So do I said. "But less often than I did." "I keep thinking about the ring," he said. "Me too," I said. "I think we should put it on the bulkhead." We did. We found the ring where it had pinged into the corner by the green-painted step, and we bolted it to the inside of the door with 2 stainless screws that will outlast us, and we wrote beneath it with the paint pen, "Fechado por todos nos," closed by all of us. Nobody made a speech. It did not need one. Marta put a hand on the door and closed her eyes for 1 second in a way that either meant nothing or everything. In the months after, the floating city did not become a miracle. It held because we held it. People arrived in boats that worked and boats that shouldn't have. And we had new words for triage because the old ones were tired. We fed them, and when we could, we kept them. Sometimes they moved on to a ship bound for a port that was functioning again. A port with cranes and customs and officials whose faces said yes. Sometimes we sent them to the patrol boat because the patrol boat had doctors and blankets and another kind of shelter. Sometimes we said no, and the word tugged at us like a current, but we said it anyway because the world is large, and we were not. Luca grew 2 centimeters and started using words like yaw, surge, and lockout-tagout in sentences that made engineers clap. Paloma got promoted and then called it something else. Dr. Sato did not retire because some people do not. Ines kept clipping her checklist to her vest and saved lives by counting in the right order. Hakan learned to love the word practice and stopped loving the word proof, which made him more trustworthy. Marta ran out of stories about storms she had already been through and began telling ones that started with, "The first time we..." I kept the stall open. I burned the garlic sometimes when the radio ran too loud. I learned to judge the wind by the taste of spray when I stepped outside. I learned to keep a coil of line on a hook by the counter and to mind my seals and hinges like they were pets. I learned that broth can carry more than hunger away, and that a boat hook is a way to say no politely. We did not forget the water beneath us. We put cameras down on days when the swell was something you could greet by name. We watched fish and cables in the long green light that looks like a memory of the surface. We saw a seal once, and we did not call it a seal. We called it a friend who stayed away, and that was good. We did not see arms rise again, not for a while. That didn't make us safe, it made us ready. On a morning, with a sky like aluminum and a barometer with good manners, Luca came to the counter and asked, "Do you think the ocean likes us?" "No," I said, wiping the ladle against the rim of the pot. "I don't think it notices." "Then why does it let us stay?" he asked, undismayed. "Because we're interesting," I said. "Because we try. Because we keep our doors shut when we must and open when we can. Because we know the difference." He nodded. He took his bowl and sat by the rail. He ate like a child who had learned the value of eating sitting down. He talked to his mother about a turbine blade pitch adjustment as if it were a toy. He did not look at the south catwalk with the ring bolted on the inside of the door. He did not have to. We were not a miracle. We were a practice. We were a city in a life ring that we kept afloat with knots and soup and rules, and the kindness of people who hold a door because they know what water does. The world beyond us had not finished writing its loud story about research and news and what to call the thing that made people into danger. We had finished one chapter of our quieter book and did not close it yet. At night, I still listen for a knock. When I hear it, I lift my eyes to the horizon where a patrol boat might appear like a sentence I can live with, or a helicopter might write its loud line across the wind. I check the door. I check the broth. I count the bowls. I count the people. I count the hands. I put my hand on steel that still holds the shape of a crescent moon welded smooth, and I think, we will hold, not because we are proof against anything, but because we practice together. And in the morning, when the sun turns our glass to gold again, I open the shutter and write the day's menu on the chalkboard like a promise I intend to keep. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.